And we are live again. So in the last hour or so, I released another Cashless Society video showing how government and big technology, maybe even the Chinese government, others, will not let a good crisis go to waste. So be sure to check that out. It's only about 10 minutes long. There's a lot of articles in there. If you want to read more of the articles, you can just take a look at the screenshots that I use. But you're probably not going to be happy about it if you do. Anyways, we are at another day and another bailout, unfortunately. So this is the next round of the SBA loans, and it looks like there's going to be even more than that coming. But first, let me just talk about this. So Congress just finalized the $484 billion relief package for small business, hospitals, and testing. The Senate unanimously approved a bipartisan deal Tuesday afternoon that will pump another $310 billion into the Paycheck Protection Program. Say that 3 times fast. A federal, or PPP, do not say that 3 times fast out loud. A federal program designed to extend loans to small business owners. Although I just said it out loud. Anyway, extend loans to small business owners to help retain their employees for 2 months and keep their companies afloat amid the global pandemic. The overall deal lawmakers and the White House agreed to tops $484 billion, and this is just getting started. Because as long as the dollar index, my thesis is this, as long as the dollar index and the trade-weighted dollar stay at these levels at 100, the Fed, the Treasury, the Trump administration, and Congress can get away with all these promises, all these bailouts, all these stimulus programs, because the Fed then does not have to defend the currency. I did an interview with Dr. Mark Faber earlier today. Unfortunately, it looks like Zoom Pro may have had a heart attack. All 40 minutes of the audio I thought was recorded. From speaking to friends who have used Zoom and Zoom Pro, it's never happened to them before, but apparently it happened to me. So now I'm talking with Zoom tech support, trying to get the audio back. So hopefully I don't have to redo the interview. I will keep you updated on that. It's in tech support's hands, because it only, after the interview, 40-plus minute good audio was done, it only spat out 23 minutes of like scratchy sounds and gibberish, which is nothing like the actual audio that was recorded. Okay, so back to this main article here. So my thesis is this, as long as the dollar index and the trade-weighted dollar are not rapidly falling, Congress, President Trump, and the Fed can get away with these announcements, these guarantees, these programs. So you are going to see more of these to prevent that Brent Johnson rip your face off rally, to prevent that Raoul Pal rip your face off dollar index rally. There is almost nothing to stop the Congress, the Treasury, and the Fed, as long the biggest vote is the dollar. If the dollar was being on the exchange rate was falling and the Federal Reserve and the Treasury had to step in to defend the currency, in my opinion, they would not be issuing this many programs. They would have to slow it down. But because the dollar index is where it is, they feel that they can get away with this. So the overall, and plus, as you can see there on your screen on the collage, you can see that this money is not going, a lot of it is not going to the people that it was intended to. I'm hearing from lots of podcast listeners who are small business owners who are not getting the SBA loans, even though they are more than qualified. They were turned away by their banks or the SBA. Okay, back to the article. The overall deal, lawmakers and the White House agreed to tops $484 billion. This comes just after weeks, this comes just weeks after Congress approved a $2 trillion stimulus package. It's really a bailout, but they labeled it stimulus, so it sounds better. The largest relief measure in American history. Quote, it's unfortunate it took our Democratic colleagues 12 days to agree to a deal that contains essentially nothing that Republicans ever opposed. In my view, it's indefensible that Main Street small businesses and their workers had their assistance cut off for partisan leverage. The American people cannot be political leverage. I'm glad we're now poised to move ahead. Senate Majority Leader and neocon and in bed with the Chinese government. He's literally in bed with the Chinese government because his wife is like really high up there. Well, her father is, and she's an heiress, and the father is one of the main founding families, or one of the main elite families, dozen or so families in the Chinese Communist Party. If you don't believe me, go and read Peter Schweitzer's new book, Secret Empire, where it's extensively detailed. Mitch McConnell said, or Cocaine Mitch, said on the Senate floor before the voice vote Tuesday. The Senate attempted to pass $251 billion in aid for the small business loan program, but that vote failed earlier in the month because it wasn't enough. All these congressmen and women, senators, could not. And remember, these bills have to get passed in the Senate and the House, different versions, and then they get combined later. So one version has to get passed in the Senate, another version has to get passed in the House, and this is when, if you're not familiar with how American government works, this is when all the lobbyists, all the special interest groups, all the corporate lobbyists, all the people in Congress are all horse trading. They're all like, oh, my brother's uncle, sister's cousin wants to start an LLC and he needs like $5 million, but he doesn't know how to do construction, or he doesn't know how to do this. Oh, okay, but he's still gonna get the dollars and not pay them back. So they're trading all this stuff. All this stuff is being traded. There's going to be stuff in this bill that had no relation to what the legislation was intended. This is just part of, unfortunately, because I've been here for 20 years now, how the sausage is made. Okay, back to the article here. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer released their own statement claiming victory over Republicans in getting the $484 billion deal cobbled together. Quote, Democrats flipped this emergency package from an insufficient Republican plan that left behind hospitals and health and frontline workers and did nothing to aid the survival of the most vulnerable small businesses on Main Street. That sounds good, but we'll see if small businesses actually get the SBA loans this time too. The two leaders said in a joint statement on Tuesday, it is unfortunate that Republicans' refusal to negotiate it's late at night, to negotiate in a bipartisan way delayed agreement on this legislation. Now Congress will move swiftly to bring this legislation to the floor and pass it this week so that we can bring desperately needed resources to those who are suffering. The House is expected to vote on the massive deal on Thursday before it heads to President Donald Trump's desk for his signature. Again, both houses of Congress, Senate and House of Representatives, have to pass a version of the bill. Trump signaled his approval of the deal on Twitter, saying, quote, I urge the Senate and House to pass the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act with additional funding for the PPP, hospitals, and testing. The agreement also adds $60 billion for the Small Business Administration's Disaster Relief Fund, and farms and other agricultural enterprises would now be considered eligible. It also provides an additional $75 billion to hospitals and $25 billion to testing, including resources for states. And this is probably where I should switch. If you want to read the rest of the article, be in the information and description section. Now speaking of states, none of this bill addressed the problems with state and local governments, how there is no tax revenues coming in. Again, this goes back to my video in the last few days, the hockey stick and cash flow problem. There is a cash flow problem at all levels of society. Cash flows are needed to pay bills. Cash flows are needed to pay taxes. Cash flows are needed for investments. Society runs on cash flows, not... So asset values are nice. Asset values are good for retirement. The real economy runs on cash flows. Okay, cash flows. I was telling my friend Tho Bishop this. Shout out to Tho if he's listening to the live stream show from the Mises Institute a couple days ago. That cash flows are the gasoline that fuels the economic engine. It's all about cash flows. They are the most important. Not necessarily asset prices, cash flows. That's what really drives economic growth. It drives everything. Okay, so the main part here, as you can see with that down arrow there, that there is a minimum $500 billion rescue package that the senators and governors have been lobbying for since the first 10 days of April. I found an article here at the beginning of April, so they've been lobbying for this for a while now. So U.S. senators proposed $500 billion rescue for state and local governments. So this is going to be, also President Trump has talked about potentially another round after this one of SBA loans. So that's a possibility. But this seems to be the main next bailout is U.S. senators propose $500 billion rescue for state local governments. A U.S. Senate Republican and a Democrat proposed a $500 billion rescue package for state and municipal governments on Monday, as it became increasingly clear that the next global pandemic relief bill will not include any money or any currency for reeling local authorities. The article said money. Quote, the current bill coming out will not have this aid or any aid for states and municipalities. It kind of makes sense, though, because we don't yet know what the toll is. Actually, the toll is there is no cash flows coming in. He's just being polite. This Republican Senator Bill Cassidy said on a conference call with journalists. Everyone is aware there's no cash flow coming in. So the lack of economic activity, people are only going to pharmacies, grocery stores, Walmart, Target. Maybe they're ordering takeout or delivery from a delivery service. That is a tiny amount of economic activity compared to the usual amounts. And that means that state and local governments have no tax revenues coming in from real economic activity. That is the problem. That's why they're talking about this, because the governors realize this. Cassidy of Louisiana and New Jersey Democrat Bob Menendez, who's a corrupt scumbag too. If you wanna learn more about that, read some of his stories about what was said at his trial. Amazing how he got off. How he got off the trial. He also is a sick pervert too. Who represent two of the states hit hardest by the pandemic, said their bill would allocate money based on states' populations, infection rates, and revenue losses in order to ensure that money goes where it is needed most. The two senators discussed their proposed legislation as Democrats and Republicans worked on details of a possible, it said at the time it was $450 billion plus deal. Now it's $484 billion. Who knows what the next round's going to be? But this seems to be a major problem, is the tax shortfall, because how are these government employees at the state level and municipal level, how are they going to still get paid? That's going to be interesting. $450 billion because China had to do this last year, where a lot of provincial employees were not paid on time. State-owned enterprises were not paying. Teachers, state-owned enterprises were not paying their bills on time. Took them months sometimes. A lot of local government employees. There were tons and tons of stories of this in China last year, 2019, way before the global pandemic, before the coronavirus. So it looks like it's hit here too. $450 billion plus deal. Okay, it's no longer $450 billion, it's $484 billion to provide more aid to small businesses and hospitals hurt by the global pandemic. State governors and local officials across the United States have been pleading for more federal aid to provide essential services as Americans stay home and businesses have closed because of the global pandemic. Congressional leaders say they could vote on the latest bill, which would follow a $2.3 trillion aid package passed in March as soon as this week. So we're already looking at another day, another bailout series. We're looking at the next one coming down the pipe. This one for state and local governments and municipality bailouts, because they're going to default. If they don't get some tax revenue coming in, they're looking, what is there going to be forbearance on their bonds? Is there going to be a temporary not payment, or are they going to default on their municipal bonds? And that's why the Fed's buying municipal bonds. See, this is all this doom vortex loop that me and George Gammon talk about all the time. And a lot of it's because of the cash flow problem. Cassidy and Menendez say they had hoped their bipartisan bill could provide a framework for what they dubbed COVID-4, a subsequent tranche of coronavirus aid. It's ridiculous. They're even getting creative with the stupid nicknames now. COVID-19 is the... Okay, I can't believe they put that in the article too. Thank you, Captain Obvious. COVID-19 is the name of the illness caused by the coronavirus. Why would they put that in the article? Quote, oh my God, it's just ridiculous. Quote, COVID 3.5. The current bill is more focused on business and hospitals, primary and testing, Menendez said. We think this is well poised for what I believe will be a COVID-4. Welcome to dystopia. Another day, another bailout. And they're going to get away with it as long as the dollar index and the trade-weighted dollar don't fall. Because then the Fed and the Treasury don't have to defend the currency. They could focus on doing these programs so the dollar doesn't rally. Who knows? Maybe they're going to wipe out student loans. If the dollar gets strong enough, maybe they wipe out student loans too. I mean, there's a bunch of things that they could do. Trump could do infrastructure. There's a ton of things. And if nothing works, as I discussed in my George Gammon interview, they can do a Plaza Accord deal like 1985, or they can do what FDR did in 1934, because why not? Because Trump is acting in many ways similar to what Herbert Hoover and FDR did. Look at the stuff that Trump is talking about now with the oil industry bailouts. So last week, it was paying oil drillers to not drill, which was similar to Herbert Hoover and FDR paying farmers to let their crops die during the Great Depression in 1929. And then today, Trump was talking more about a new bailout for oil companies. After the SBA loan money, disproportionately a lot of it, the first round of SBA loan money, was redirected to Texas. Because that's where a lot of Trump's voter base is. Texas and Oklahoma. Again, when the government gets involved, more control, less freedom, misallocation of capital, a lot of waste, fraud, corruption, and abuse. We've already seen tons of examples that the SBA loan program, whether it's hedge funds that are applying after the hedge funds blew up and they still applied for SBA loans. I haven't seen any stories that the hedge funds actually got it. I just saw stories saying that hedge funds applied for it, that some of them did. Okay, we got a super chat here from J6. He said, thanks. I still don't get how the dollar is strong. I explained this in my dollar tug of war videos, which you can look at in the archive section. There's a number of dollar tug of war videos, and also in my newest one with George Gammon, the interview with George Gammon that I did for his Rebel Capitalist show, where I outlined my dollar tug of war thesis. Now, I don't know how much longer the dollar tug of war thesis is going to last. It's tough to say. I'm not making any currency trades or any leverage here. I have gold and silver as insurance, savings, and wealth preservation. But I'm just stating that the dollar index is in a very powerful tug of war, and it's because there is very strong demand for dollars because of all this dollar-denominated debt outside the U.S. and those dollar derivatives that I explained what they are and showed news stories about them in the George Gammon interview. Well, his editor put the news stories up while I was talking. I'm not a good enough editor to actually do that. I can do basic editing. I can do basic audio, video editing. I can't do the fancy stuff. But now that more money's coming in, thanks to my Patreon account contributors, maybe in the future I'll be able to hire someone on a per job basis to do stuff like that. Maybe I can get a little fancier. I've interviewed Mark Faber many times. It's in all of the interviews I've done with Mark Faber in the archives. I've interviewed Mark many times over the years. Maybe I want to say like at least half a dozen. Again, there's over 500 interviews in the archives. If you're new to my channel, just come over here from George Gammon with my interview. I've done over 500 interviews. A lot of them are in the archives because I was doing a lot of live stream shows and other short videos with PowerPoint slides lately. But there is a lot of interviews in the archives over the years on a lot of different topics. I was interviewing Trace Meyer many years ago. I knew Trace before he bought a single Bitcoin. Okay, well, I think that's it for the short little video. We got over 300 people watching. Not enough people have smashed the like button or tapped it. Clicked it. I'm trying to think of the snowflake version. Tap or click. But last week in the live chat, there was some women there that were typing sexual positions that they were going to do the live chat. So please keep it PG-13 for now. Okay, that's it for tonight. I'm getting tired. I've done enough work for today. I put out an article for my Patreon account contributors. There's another extensive Sandstorm Gold article out there, along with the Sandstorm Gold article also has a lot of explanation about the royalty and streaming business, how it works for those who are not familiar. There is the short video about the cashless society I just put out, and then, of course, all the article links discussed that you can see there on your screen in that collage of corruption, that collage of government misallocation of capital, that collage of dollar purchasing power weakening, dollar purchasing power being devalued before our very eyes will be below the video in the information and description section. Again, thank you to my over 700 Patreon account contributors, my 10 or so, I think, monthly PayPal contributors, and people tip me once in a while. You can do so wallstreetformainstreet at Gmail through my PayPal account if you want to just give me a tip once in a while. I also take crypto donations. So I do have some crypto, not a lot though. I have some Bitcoin and some Litecoin. I haven't sold any of it. Okay, everyone, have a nice rest of your day. Excuse me, have a nice, I'm definitely getting real tired. Have a nice rest of your evening. And I'm sure, unfortunately, that there's going to be a lot more stories like this because we are still in a fast and furious rules change environment and another day, another bailout. And they will get away with this as long as the trade-weighted dollar index does not get really weak and the dollar index does not start to fall. They're going to try to get away with as much as possible. And by who is they? the people here in Washington, D.C. So Congress, the U.S. Treasury, the bureaucracy, the lobbyists, the Fed, of course the Fed, but basically all the parasites from large corporations, from New York City, Wall Street, big tech, and of course here in the Washington, D.C. metro area, which is one of the biggest ideological bubbles divorced from reality in history.